Hi guys. This is Grimv. I have another creepy and spine-chilling story to tell. Some jobs aren't worth the money. Some jobs take more from you than they give. I learned that the hard way. At the time, I was desperate. College tuition was draining my bank account faster than I could keep up, and my part-time job barely covered food and rent. Every time I checked my balance, it felt like a punch to the gut. Bills kept piling up, and no matter how many extra shifts I picked up, I was always falling behind. I needed a side job fast. Something easy, quick, and preferably well-paying. No complicated interviews, no weeks of waiting for a paycheck, just instant cash. That's when I stumbled upon the ad. Wanted, babysitter for one night. Pays $500. Must follow instructions carefully. $500 for a single night? That was insane. Too good to be true, really. Babysitting usually paid, what, $15 an hour at best? My first instinct told me there had to be a catch. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe it was some kind of scam. But then I thought about my empty fridge, my overdue internet bill, and the fact that I had about $20 to my name. I wasn't in a position to be picky. Without overthinking it, I grabbed my phone and dialed the number listed in the ad. The phone barely rang twice before someone picked up. A woman. Her voice was cold, distant, completely void of warmth, like she was reading off a script. Be here by 7 p.m. sharp. No guests. No phone calls, she said. I opened my mouth to respond, to ask any of the 100 questions running through my mind, but the line went dead before I could get a single word out. No introduction, no small talk, nothing. Just an address and a set of rules. That should have been my first red flag. Who hires a total stranger without even asking basic questions? No, do you have experience? No, have you worked with kids before? Just instructions. But $500 for a few hours of babysitting? No way was I passing that up. I drove to the house and arrived. The house was massive. Not just big mansion big. It stood at the very end of a long, deserted road, surrounded by nothing but empty land and thick, shadowy trees. No neighbors. No streetlights. Just a cracked, lonely pavement leading up to an eerie, towering house. A single porch light flickered weakly, barely illuminating the front door. The whole place looked straight out of one of those horror movies I usually avoided. Something about it made me hesitate. The silence. The stillness. The way the windows loomed like dark, empty eyes. I took a breath, shaking off the creeping unease, and walked up the steps. My knuckles barely brushed against the wood when the door creaked open, like someone had been standing behind it, waiting for me. A man stood in the doorway. He was tall, painfully thin, with sharp features that made his hollowed-out face look even more severe. Deep, dark circles pooled under his sunken eyes, like he hadn't slept in weeks. Maybe months. Despite his exhaustion, his suit was crisp, perfectly pressed, not a wrinkle in sight. Behind him, a woman hovered stiffly, her posture so rigid she looked like she might shatter. Her hands were clasped tightly in front of her, knuckles bone white, like she was holding onto something for dear life. The man's gaze locked onto mine. His voice was flat. Mechanical. "You're the babysitter." I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. "Yeah." The woman stepped forward before I could say anything else and shoved a folded piece of paper into my hand. "These are the instructions." I glanced down at it but didn't open it yet. Something about their urgency made my stomach twist. "So, where's the kid?" I asked, forcing a small smile. Neither of them answered. The woman didn't even blink. She just turned on her heel, grabbed her coat, and started toward the door. "We'll be back by sunrise," she said quickly. "Follow the rules, and you'll be fine." And then before I could ask anything else, they were gone. The door shut behind them with a quiet but firm click. I stood there for a long moment, gripping the piece of paper in my hand, my unease growing by the second. Why had they left so quickly? Why did this whole thing feel wrong? Finally, I looked down at the list. The paper was old, slightly crumpled, and covered in tight, neat handwriting, each letter carefully formed, as if someone had taken painstaking effort to make sure every word was clear. It wasn't printed, no official babysitting instructions, just a handwritten list. It wasn't rushed or scribbled, it was deliberate. Like whoever wrote it needed me to understand. My eyes schemed over the rules, my stomach twisting with each one. Rule number 1. Put Timmy to bed by 8:30 p.m. If he asks for a bedtime story, only read from the green book on his shelf. Do not read any other book aloud. Okay, strict, but fine. Maybe it was a sentimental book or something. Rule number 2. Lock all doors and windows before 9 p.m. If you hear scratching at the back door, do not investigate. I blinked. What? That was weird. Why would there be scratching? A raccoon? A stray cat? Rule number 3. Do not answer the phone after 11 p.m. My pulse quickened. Why? Who would be calling? And why would I need to ignore it? Rule number 4. If Timmy tells you someone is outside his window, do not look. Tell him, "Go to sleep, Timmy." Do not say anything else. Okay. No. That was officially creepy. Rule number 5. If you hear footsteps upstairs while Timmy is asleep, ignore them. Whatever you do, do not go upstairs. A lump formed in my throat. Footsteps. But there shouldn't be anyone else in the house. Rule number 6. At 11:33 p.m., the kitchen door will open on its own. Do not close it. Do not look inside. Let it remain open until 11:42 p.m. My hands felt clammy. I wiped them on my jeans. Rule number 7. If you hear a child giggling from the second floor, ignore it. The boy you are babysitting is asleep. I swallowed hard. My eyes darted back to the top of the list, rereading every rule, hoping maybe I had misunderstood something. But the words were still there, clear as day. Rule number 8. If you wake up on the couch and don't remember falling asleep, leave the house immediately. Do not look back. I let out a nervous laugh. A dry, humorless sound. This had to be a joke, right? A prank. Maybe the parents were just messing with me, some weird rich people humor I didn't understand. Then, I heard a voice. "Are you my new babysitter?" I jumped, my heart slamming into my ribs as I spun around. A little boy stood at the bottom of the staircase, staring at me with wide, tired eyes. He couldn't have been older than 6. His blonde hair was messy, sticking up in different directions like he'd been tossing and turning in bed. He wore pajamas, soft, blue ones covered in tiny stars. I forced a smile, trying to steady my breathing. "Yeah. You must be Timmy." He nodded. "Did my mom give you the rules?" he asked. Something about the way he asked sent a chill up my spine. His tone wasn't casual or curious. It was serious. My stomach twisted. Yeah. His expression darkened. His small fingers tightened on the banister. "You have to follow them." I stared at him, unable to respond. His voice was quiet, but there was a weight behind it, something heavy, something that made my skin crawl. I shook off the unease, forcing myself to focus. It was just a kid. Just a weird set of rules. Nothing was going to happen. I led Timmy upstairs, my footsteps echoing in the quiet house. His room was small and tidy, with a little twin bed and a row of stuffed animals lined up against the wall. Everything was neatly arranged, like it hadn't been touched in a while. As I pulled the blanket over him, he whispered, "Don't forget to lock the doors and windows." I nodded quickly, not wanting to show my discomfort. "I won't. Get some sleep, okay?" He didn't answer. He studied my face for a moment, like he was trying to decide if he could trust me. Then, finally, just turned over, hugging a stuffed bear to his chest, and he closed his eyes. As soon as his breathing evened out, I left the room and made my way through the house, double-checking every door, every window. The locks clicked into place, one by one, until I was sure everything was secure. I had just finished locking the back door when I heard it. A faint scratching. I froze. The sound was soft but deliberate. A slow, dragging scrape, like fingernails running over the wood. My breath caught in my throat. A cold chill ran down my spine as my eyes flicked toward the paper still clutched in my hand. Rule number 2, if you hear scratching at the back door, do not investigate. My throat tightened. Every instinct screamed at me to look to check, just to make sure it wasn't, I don't know, a tree branch or an animal. But something deep inside me knew better. I squeezed my eyes shut, my pulse hammering in my ears. Just walk away. Ignore it. It's nothing. Slowly, I forced my legs to move, stepping away from the door. The scratching continued behind me, steady and patient, as if whatever was out there knew I was listening. Minutes passed. The scratching continued, slow and rhythmic, until, finally it stopped. I let out a shaky breath. I spent the next hour glued to my phone, scrolling through social media mindlessly, trying to drown out the silence. But the quiet was suffocating. The whole house felt wrong. Too still, too heavy, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Every creak, every shift in the floorboards made my heart pound. I forced myself to check the clock. Then, at exactly 11 p.m., the house phone rang. I froze. I jolted so hard my phone nearly slipped from my hands. The old landline sat on the wall near the kitchen. Its shrill, piercing ring shattered the silence, echoing through the dimly lit living room, sharp and unrelenting. My breath hitched. Rule number 3, do not answer the phone after 11 p.m. I turned my head slowly, my gaze landing on the old-fashioned phone sitting on the small table across the room. I stared at it, my pulse pounding in my ears. The ringing didn't stop. It just kept going, over and over, like whoever was on the other end wasn't going to give up. The ringing was insistent, demanding. Like it knew I was here. It rang again. And again. And again. I turned my back to it, gripping my phone in my hands, trying to ignore it. Just a few more seconds, and it would stop. Each ring made my stomach clench tighter. My fingers twitched. My breathing came fast and shallow. What would happen if I answered? Who would be on the other end? I squeezed my hands into fists, my nails digging into my palms. Ignore it. Just ignore it. Seconds dragged on like hours. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the ringing cut off. Silence. I let out a slow breath, forcing myself to relax. But just as my shoulders sagged, miss. My stomach plummeted. I spun around so fast my vision blurred. Timmy stood at the bottom of the staircase. His small hands gripped the railing tightly, his knuckles white, his eyes wide with fear. His face was pale, his lower lip trembling. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "There's someone outside my window." My blood ran cold. Rule number 4 flashed in my mind. If Timmy tells you someone is outside his window, do not look. Tell him, "Go to sleep, Timmy." Do not say anything else. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to keep my voice steady. "It's okay, Timmy. Go to sleep." Timmy didn't move right away. His small fingers gripped the banister, knuckles turning pale. His lip quivered as he shifted on his feet. "But, he's staring at me." A chill spread through my body, icy and slow. My instincts screamed at me to run upstairs, to check, to look, but I knew I couldn't. The rules were clear. I forced a weak smile, even though my hands were shaking. "Go to sleep, Timmy." His wide eyes flicked toward the hallway, and for a second, I thought he was going to argue. His little body trembled, a quiet fear radiating from him like static electricity. But then, slowly, he nodded. Without another word, he turned and padded back toward his room. He climbed into bed, pulling the covers up to his chin. Then Timmy asked suddenly, "Are you scared?" My breath caught. I turned my head slowly, my heart hammering in my ears. Timmy was still sitting upright in bed. He shouldn't have been. I had just tucked him in, just watched him lay down. But there he was, sitting silently, watching me. His pale face seemed even paler under the dim glow of his nightlight. He was small for his age, fragile looking, with dark circles under his eyes. I forced out a short, nervous chuckle. "Of what?" Timmy didn't blink. He didn't answer. Instead, in a quiet, almost pleading voice, he whispered, "Don't close the kitchen door." A cold, twisting fear coiled in my stomach. I pressed my lips together and nodded. "Okay." I left his room and shut the door behind me firm, but gentle, careful not to make a sound. I could still feel his gaze, burning into my back. I didn't check the window. I couldn't check the window. My legs carried me downstairs on autopilot, though every step felt heavier, harder to take. I tried to shake off the nerves, tried to convince myself this was all in my head. I was trying to calm the wild pounding in my chest. Just make it through the night. The rules were just weird rules, right? The parents were strict. Maybe paranoid. Maybe they had a reason for all of this. Maybe I was just overthinking. I settled onto the couch, wrapping a blanket around myself, my hands clenched tight in the fabric. I glanced at the clock. 11:32 p.m. My stomach twisted. My fingers gripped the blanket tighter. And then, 11:33 p.m. A long, low creak echoed through the house. My body went rigid. The kitchen door swung open. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. A deep, suffocating darkness seeped out from the doorway, too dark, stretching like ink bleeding into the air. The doorway itself looked wrong, somehow. Like it was pulling further away, stretching longer than it should have been. I squeezed my eyes shut. Don't look inside. Let it remain open until 11:42 p.m. I fumbled for my phone with shaking fingers. The screen glowed in the darkness. 7 minutes left. That was all. 7 minutes. Just wait. Just sit still. Then from the darkness, I heard breathing. Not mine. Not Timmy's. Something else. It was deep and slow, a wet, rasping inhale, followed by an even slower exhale. I pressed my back against the couch, my nails digging into my palms. My whole body was tense, every muscle locked in place. The breathing got louder. Closer. So close, I could almost feel it against my skin. A shudder crawled up my spine. My phone screen flickered. 11:41 p.m. Almost there. Just one more minute. The breath hitched like it was shifting, moving. The clock finally struck 11:42 p.m. The sound stopped. I opened my eyes and looked. The kitchen door was closed. My chest heaved as I sucked in a shaky breath. My lungs burned, like I'd been holding it in for too long. My fingers, still clenched into fists, slowly unfurled, the movement stiff and reluctant. When I glanced down, my palms were marked with deep, crescent-shaped indentations where my nails had dug in too deep. A sharp sting ran through them, but I barely registered the pain. It was over. For now. I checked the time again. 11:43 p.m. The house was silent, but not in a peaceful way. It wasn't the kind of quiet that brought relief. It was the kind that pressed down on you, thick and suffocating, like something unseen was still there, lurking just beyond sight. Watching. Waiting. I stayed on the couch, refusing to move. My body was still coiled tight, my muscles aching from the tension. I tried to focus on my breathing, to slow my racing pulse, to convince myself that everything was fine. But my heart barely had time to slow before I heard a child's giggle. The sound came from upstairs. I went completely still. My eyes darted to the baby monitor on the coffee table. The small screen showed Timmy's bed. He was there. Asleep. Not moving. The giggling got louder. It wasn't him. My throat tightened. Rule number 6, if you hear a child giggling from the second floor, ignore it. The boy you are babysitting is asleep. I clenched my hands into fists, nails biting into my skin. Ignore it. Just ignore it. The giggling stopped. For a moment, the house was silent again. Then, from behind the couch, a whisper came. You're no fun. A cold rush of terror flooded my veins. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I stayed perfectly still, my body locked in place, waiting. The silence stretched on. I sat there, frozen, until the house felt normal again. I exhaled shakily, barely realizing I'd been holding my breath. My chest ached, my muscles weak from how tense I had been. I forced myself to check the clock. My body sagging in relief. My heart was hammering so hard it hurt. See? Nothing happened. I followed the rules, and nothing happened. Everything was fine. And then I heard soft footsteps. Upstairs. I went rigid. I was on the couch. Timmy was asleep in his room. I had checked. I had seen him. But, I could hear them. Slow. Deliberate. Measured steps pressing against the wooden floor above me, moving with an eerie patience. I gripped the armrest, my fingers digging into the fabric. Rule number 5, if you hear footsteps upstairs while Timmy is asleep, ignore them. Do not go upstairs. I squeezed my eyes shut, breathing through my nose. Ignore it. It's just noise. Just a house settling. I clamped a hand over my mouth, choking back the instinct to scream. Ignore it. Just ignore it. I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing my back harder into the couch, as if that would somehow shield me from whatever was up there. My whole body trembled, a cold sweat slicking my skin. The footsteps didn't stop. They moved again, slow, deliberate. Pacing. Back and forth. Just above me. My mind raced. Who, or what, was up there? No. It didn't matter. I wasn't going to find out. A floorboard creaked. The steps were moving down the hall, toward Timmy's room. A sharp, icy panic tore through my chest. I wanted to run, to throw open his door and grab him, but I couldn't. The rules. Follow the rules. Then, I heard a whisper. "Miss? Why didn't you listen?" A shudder rippled through me. My vision blurred. My chest ached, like the air was too thick, too heavy. My fingers trembled as I rubbed my eyes. My breath came in short, ragged gasps. I kept my eyes shut tight, forcing myself to block out the sound. Don't react. Don't acknowledge it. Seconds dragged into minutes, each one stretching unbearably long. And then the footsteps stopped. Silence. Darkness swallowed me whole. The dizziness hit me hard, like something had sucked all the energy from my body in an instant. For a moment, maybe longer, I was weightless, drifting in a void of nothingness. There was no sound, no sensation. Just an endless, suffocating emptiness. My mind felt disconnected from my body, like I was floating in a dream. Or maybe a nightmare. My head swam. My limbs felt weak. And then I collapsed. The world faded to black. I don't remember dreaming. I don't remember anything at all. I must have dozed off, because the next thing I knew, I was waking up. In Timmy's bed. My entire body turned to ice. The sheets beneath me were soft. The air smelled faintly of dust and something stale. Wrong. I bolted upright, my pulse slamming against my ribs. No, no, no. Rule number 7, if you wake up somewhere other than the couch, immediately leave the house without looking behind you. I sat up, frozen, my breath coming in sharp, panicked gulps. The air around me felt thick, heavy, pressing down on my shoulders. I couldn't hear anything, no wind, no cars outside. Just a deep, swallowing silence. The mattress dipped. Suddenly, from the darkness behind me, a voice whispered, "Emily, where are you going?" Something was in bed with me. A cold sweat broke across my skin. I did not turn around. I forced my body to move, inch by inch. My hands trembled as I pushed the blanket off. My feet touched the cold floor. Behind me, the presence shifted. I bit the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted blood. Don't run. Don't panic. And my decision was already made. I was leaving. Not just this house. Not just this job. This town. I packed what little I had, stuffing my bag with trembling hands. No goodbyes. No explanations. I didn't want to explain. Because I didn't understand. And worse, I didn't want to. I stood. I walked forward. I kept my head down as I stepped outside. The floor creaked under my steps. Behind me, footsteps followed. Soft. Slow. Playful. I reached the hallway. The footsteps quickened. A breath cold and damp brushed the back of my neck. I ran. I hit the stairs, skipping steps, my legs burning as I pushed forward. The footsteps behind me pounded faster, matching my speed. I reached the front door, my fingers scrambling over the lock. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped my keys. I yanked the door open. The cold night air hit me like a wave. I sprinted outside, my heart slamming against my ribs. I didn't stop. Not until I reached my car. Only then did I turn back, gasping for breath, my hands still shaking. The house was dark. The front door still wide open. Something stood in the doorway. Watching. Waiting. I didn't stay to find out what. The next morning, as I looked at my purse, I noticed Timmy's bear inside my bag. I had to return it, no matter what. I couldn't keep it. My hands still trembled as I dialed the number from the babysitting ad. It rang once. Twice. Then someone picked up. A man's voice. Not the father's. Not the mother's. "This is Officer Daniels." I hesitated. I was trying to reach the family that lives at. I gave him the address, my voice unsteady. Silence. Then, in a careful, measured voice, the officer asked, "Who are you trying to reach?" I told him the couple's names. Another long pause. A cold, sinking dread settled in my stomach. Then, finally, the officer spoke. His voice was quiet. Cautious. "That house has been abandoned for 20 years. My mouth went dry. "No," I whispered. "I was there. I babysat their son." The line was silent for so long that I thought we had been disconnected. Then, the officer exhaled. A slow, careful breath. "There was a little boy that lived there once." I gripped my phone tighter. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. The officer's voice was barely above a whisper. "But he died in 2003. The call cut off. I stared at my phone, my chest rising and falling too fast. Then, I felt it. A shift in the air. The tiny, creeping sensation of being watched. Slowly, stiffly, I turned my head. I looked at the bear. It wasn't the same anymore. And I swear I saw it smiling at me.